or other that yes, I may be satisfied materially, and yet it's not enough. We often go on searching for greater meaning and a greater sense of purpose in our lives. With me are three people who have travelled their own path to personal growth, and later I'll be asking them how they help others to do the same. Whatever the path we choose, it's clear that for each of us, life is a very personal journey.
My life is a journey from being half asleep to being fully awake.
My journey is to a point where I can accept myself.
My journey is not ever missing an opportunity to be happy. My journey is just endless.
I suppose I was living a normal sort of life, but I suppose I was cut off from a lot of my feelings.
There was a kind of person that I had to fit into, and that my own inner experience didn't always quite gel with the external expectations.
I don't have to live on that narrow little edge where I'm frightened to wake up in the morning for fear I did something wrong last night.
My early experience was actually influencing the choices I was making in my life, the direction of my life. I was actually quite frightened of people and saw them somehow as a threat. A sort of sense that group therapy had something to offer me, but I wasn't sure what, and I didn't really know what I could expect out of it at all for myself. I felt that I knew who I was. I wasn't ill. I didn't have any major problems in my life. I wasn't cracking up.
This work is about having choice over your feelings, whether you express them or not, but at least being in contact with them.
My first group was very frightening, but it was also very exciting. I mean, in a very short space of time, you find yourself communicating in a way that you perhaps don't normally communicate with people. Did you feel that my back wasn't actually supporting? Because at one point you said to me, higher up, you don't actually know what you're going to feel, and sometimes what you feel in a group is not what you want to feel at all, and it's very painful, and it's very difficult.
Perhaps someone is missing. Perhaps someone you want to find. You can't quite find them.
The first reaching out exercise I found very distressing, and I felt a tremendous sense of hopelessness. I felt I was reaching out to a void, to emptiness, and I think the tears were about the emptiness, about the realisation of my inability to actually vocalise that.
When you, for instance, in a group discover something of enormous importance to you, you may not feel the support of the group immediately. What your job is to find out what pushes those buttons, what creates the situation that makes you react, so that you can then, when it happens, say, here it goes, I just felt the button, now I have a choice. Do I behave the way I've always behaved, or do I now choose to behave in another way?
Each group I've done, there's a feeling that that maybe a little bit of me opens out a little more. I mean, I might close down a little bit as I sort of go out into the world, but just a little bit of me is more open to change, to possibilities in my life. I didn't want to give it to you. I was willing you to give it to me, willing you know.
When something happens, a crisis occurs, and we are faced with the unknown, it's really that moment of choosing to be excited about what could be happening rather than trying to hold on, because that's a painful position to be in.
I suppose the fear that most of us have about change is the fear of the unknown. Meditation's been very important to me in trying to cope with crisis and change. Meditation's a way of sitting with myself. It's a way of calming the mind. It's a way of hearing that inner voice. You're trying to develop a feeling that, well, life is to be supported, life is to be encouraged, life is to be... Meditation is a way of focusing our awareness and our attention so that we are more directed and more one-pointed, less scattered or scatty. That was certainly my experience. Obviously not everybody's going to make a conscious decision to grow or to change or to face change in that way. My feeling is that if I'm not consciously trying to grow or change, I'm only half alive, that I'm half awake, and I might manage to avoid some pain, but I'll also avoid a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure.
It can lead to a more spiritual dimension when you learn who you are, when you begin to learn where your potential is, and you discover that you're more than your body and your mind and your feelings, that there's something deeper, there's something more important, something bigger, more awareness, more pure consciousness.
A spiritual experience for me does become embodied in that ability to open the heart and allow the care and the love and concern and sympathy and solidarity with life that's there to be expressed.
I mean, I think I'm going to stay more or less the same person, but I'm going to have maybe a different outlook. I'm going to see things differently, and I'm going to be less fearful, I think, and more accepting.
It's funny how in our society we regard crisis as a symbol of weakness, even of breakdown. And Liz, I'm wondering in your work how you see crisis, personal struggle.
Crisis usually happens when people enter what I call a no-go area. It's a time or experience of themselves where they've had no previous experience to cope with it. People who are very much together in themselves don't have crises. They have problems, they have difficulties, they have struggles, they have rites of passage, but they don't have crisis. What makes crisis is something new, something for which one's totally unprepared. And much of our society is geared to coping, isn't it? Get on, make your bed, lie on it, don't express your feelings. And so people have crises when they enter a part of themselves about which they know nothing at all.
But if change is to be welcomed, as the film showed, we're going to each moment go into points that we don't know.
Of course, absolutely. The Chinese live for crisis, is danger and opportunity. The danger is the something new, the unknown, and the opportunity is that is a part of ourselves which has been yet unexplored, unexpressed, unknown because of the way we've had to survive in our life. So the opportunity is that we break down, we have a crisis, we enter something new, but we break through to a different part of ourselves, which has always been there, but perhaps has been in eclipse.
People think that coming to the psychotherapy is probably to draw you back from the crisis, plonk you back on the road to normalcy, whatever that may mean.
Patch you up and send you on your way.
That's
yes.
right. How do you see your role?
I see psychotherapy very much as helping people establish what is the difference between their survival self, the self they've had to develop to survive their early life, and their seed self. I call it seed self because I believe we're born with the seed of who we are, and that's a mixture of genetic programming and also something which Jung called the self, something individually ours, uniquely ours. And that seed is going to want to develop, blossom and flower with whatever potential it has. If you've got an apple pip inside you, you're going to be an apple tree. Nothing's going to stop you. But you may have to bend and twist quite a long way from your natural growth.
And that transition can be painful. that growing can be painful.
The art of psychotherapy is to help people distinguish between the two, to know that they're not the sum total of their adaptations or their mask or their persona, and to get in touch with what the seed is. And sometimes the only way the seed has of signalling, the true self has of signalling, is through symptoms. And that's where people come to see me, through their symptoms. They might have been depressed for a long time or anxious for a long time.
So when you achieve that self-awareness, the depression, those symptoms you're talking about, do they just disappear? What happens with increasing
People
self-awareness?
begin to understand that it's a part of them that has been depressed, feels sad, and they develop a language for it and understand why it is. Maybe it's incomplete mourning for some loss that they've experienced, either in themselves or in their life. And I think people then carry what is ultimately their woundedness in a much more conscious way. Those things don't go away, our early experience. We learn to carry them differently, and actually I think we learn to help them inform us in terms of the way we live our consciousness.
Gabrielle, your route to spiritual growth is through your body, through movement.
I couldn't find any other way.
How did you find that way?
Well, I mean, partially because my own pain was the divorce between spirit and flesh, and that the fact that I had been conditioned to see my body as an enemy. And my whole healing process took place in understanding that my spiritual task was to embody the spirit. And the thing about that is that in order to do that, I had to go through a lot of other changes. For example, I had to free the body to really experience the power of my being, and to really allow the body.
What is this?
It's energy, it's life, it's action. We are a verb. We are movement, we are change.
But do you think most of us are cut off? You use the word, it's not schizophrenia, what do you call the word?
Trizophenia?
Trizophenia.
Oh yes, we're being one thing, we're like feeling one thing, saying another, and acting out a third. This is the way we do.
This is sort of shamanism. Through dance, through movement, you release the spirit's inhibitions.
Well, I don't think the spirit has any inhibitions. I think the ego has inhibitions. And
right, so we get to the spirit.
What we do
then
is that we move past that ego self, but how we have to do that. We have to free the body, we have to express the heart. And that includes the whole of the heart, our fears and our angers and our sorrows, so that we can reach our joys and our compassion. And, and really love one another and be with one another. It's hard to allow somebody else to be something that you're not willing to be yourself. In fact, we project a lot of that onto each other, the parts that we're not willing to own. And we have to empty the mind. We have to empty the mind to experience the full power of our knowingness.
Give us a clue about this. What's the goal of this movement is what? This freeing the mind?
Well, put the psyche in motion and it will free itself. It will heal itself. It's that the goal is the still point. The goal is...
That's ecstasy, you called that.
Well, yeah. The goal, I suppose, is bliss, is ecstasy. It's not something we can go to the supermarket in, but it's something we certainly deserve to experience as a state of being. I think that a lot of the other things that we do are an effort to get high, to feel our power, only we're doing it through drugs or through work, or we're doing it through externals rather than going within. And for me, the fastest way to still my mind was to move my body.
This is interesting because Lama Sogyal Rinpoche, so a difficult name for me, you must forgive me. You believe spiritual growth comes through meditation, you through movement, Gabrielle, you through stillness.
There's a very close connection between the mind and the body, very much. For example, you see the energy that moves, sometimes it's called prana, is very much the vehicle of the mind. And that, in a sense, when we work with, for example, meditation, especially in the spiritual tradition of Tibet, we work very much with the body and mind together. Otherwise, if this wholeness is not brought about, then there is no really healing, there is no really being in that respect.
So you use movement as well in your meditation?
We use movement also. We use many things. Because I think in the West, generally, when they say meditation, they think that it is just simply sitting, which is one aspect of it, however.
What is the goal?
Well, the goal of meditation, you see, is that first of all, you see, the primary aim of meditation and the spiritual path, actually especially in the Buddhist tradition, is to understand the nature of mind, a deeper nature. But in order to do that, you see, but generally our mind is posed two ways. We are either looking outwardly or we are looking inwardly. That's the position of the mind. But a lot of the time, if you look really into ourselves, we're always looking outwardly. Even when we're studying mind, we're not looking at the mind itself, from which all thoughts and emotions arise, but we are looking at the projections and the risings and thoughts.
But people
so therefore,
Therefore,
you see, what you do is you bring your mind home to really try to understand that the deeper self, it's like the sky, which is behind the cloud, to understand that. But then the trouble is, you see, when you come to look that way, there's a problem, because there are many, many thoughts and emotions which really obscure really the true seeing. So therefore, the first basic meditation practice is to just do that scattered self, which is all over, is brought into focus. Like when you are taking a picture and the camera is out of focus, it's all over. It's there, but you don't see it.
The girl on the film talked about that, didn't she? This being scatty or scattered.
That's it. So you slowly bring it together into kind of non-dual self.
Yeah, you're sort of nodding there, Liz.
Yes, I mean, I think the way that I work, in a sense, is very similar. What I'm doing is actually naming the scatteredness. You know, it's as if all my life, in order to survive, I've had to be in all places at once, or I've had to please people all the time. And that I think people need a basic understanding and a reframing of what have become problems or difficulties before they can reach that still space. It's very difficult for people to meditate if they're full of angry feelings.
And that's one of the reasons that the first level of practice is called pacifying, peaceful remaining. In Sanskrit it's called shamatha. What it really means is that the aspect of oneself which is practicing is, I always use the example like a charming host or a hostess. And all your other thoughts and emotions are very difficult guests. So therefore, what you do, the most important thing is to be very generous, to welcome. Instead of fighting with yourself, you welcome. That's really the generosity, is the ground of meditation. When you're not so difficult with your thoughts and emotions, they become a little bit easier with yourself also, and they begin to slowly settle. As they begin to settle, then from out of that state comes not only a peace, but a clarity and a wisdom insight, and also compassion, with which you can look at your thoughts, emotions, and really understand them deeper.
I think people will understand you all on one level, that, you know, you can go to a disco and dance your head off and feel really much better and happy, and that through meditation you can relax, as you said, as a first stage, and that maybe you can come to terms with a few problems, you know, or get back to normal through psychotherapy. But you're all coming up to a very different apex. You're going right beyond that, all three of you, aren't you? You're seeing the goal, this still point, this ecstasy, as we mentioned.
Well, I don't know if you can go to a disco and dance all night and feel better, perhaps, depending if you're there, who you're dancing with, or for. You know, if I'm going to a disco in my self-consciousness to have people watch my dance or see this kind of dancing, I don't think I'm going to be at all happier at the end of the evening. It's like that dancing is sacred, that it's a prayer, that it's a way to connect to the deepest part of the self, that, you know, that if you really get into your dance and follow your flow and get into the rhythms that are life, that life itself is a dance.
But you're also talking about the way one names it, aren't you? How do you help people name the journey they need to take? By using their language and empowering them, in a sense, with their own symbols or their own metaphors. If people were to go to the disco, for example, having had a sense of releasing something in themselves and meeting with that person, they would have a very different experience from someone just going to it without any meaning.
See, generally, you see, I think it's what we call two truths, the absolute truth and the relative truth. The absolute truth is the realization of one's intrinsic nature. That in some ways is unchanging like the sky, which has no border and more territory. But then on a relative level, there are different ways to actually come to the same truth. So what these are different expressions.
Yes.
If they're used skillfully, I say skillfully because normally people just go for technique. That's not the point. Like it's enough to have, not enough to have just a key because you must know how to open the lock.
But you see, the words you use, Rinpoche, that the absolute truth, they're very difficult concepts for a Western mind. I mean, how do you think that we are actually ready or able to absorb your wisdom and indeed the wisdom that you have absorbed from shamanism?
Yes, because you see, it's fundamentally human. It's neither Eastern nor Western, really. Though the forms they've come in different way because of cultural. And like, for example, I find psychotherapy has great benefit in the West because it comes from a Western experience of problems.
Yes.
But if that has a spiritual perspective, a whole view, then the different methods could be used even more wisely. That's why I think it's very important is that skillful means must be wise, wisdom must be skillful. If these are not joined together, then there's a problem. That's why sometimes but my kind of concern is that many people are searching, they get really little pieces of jigsaw puzzle, but they don't really get the overall view. That's where the training is necessary. That's where, like, for example, in the East, you spend many years of study and practice. It's not something you get with just one shot.
Yes, I agree with that.
And
really.
it's very important that having named somebody's difficulty or problem, that you allow the space for something spiritual, something other to come in, and that you honor that experience.
That's right, and that's why when you do retreats also, I remember talking to someone who's done 6-year retreat, and what she thought was that she would completely change afterwards and become a wonderful person. But what she realized that after 6-year retreat that she didn't fundamentally change. But what she learned is how to live with herself.
What difference do you think it would make if everybody, like that lady, learned or went along the path to spiritual growth? What difference would it make?
We'll become more humane, and there's maybe more understanding.
I think it offers the point of a greater interconnectedness. I think when people are aware of this other dimension, and people have it in very different ways. I mean, I think it's quite important to also say people have what we are calling spiritual experiences in the privacy of their personality, and it may be in the form of, I see, I understand. They're experiencing something of themselves for the first time. They may never use the word spiritual or this sort of language, but something in them has changed. Something in them has become more profound.
But I think it's what influences you. That basic seed is there. But it's what influences you, brings about the rising of these, you see, the seasoning of this. Like, for example, we may have the seed of joy, or we may have a seed of sorrow. If there's more and more seed of sorrow that comes up on the surface of mind, then we experience, for example, depression. Whereas if you bring more seeds of joy, then the joy is reawakened. From a meditative training point of view, you bring more joy. So that's where it's not necessary that you need to actually suffer in order to overcome suffering.
I agree with that. You can dance your pain.
You need to work through transforming. At the same time, suffering is a wonderful teaching. It's really to work with it also.
And you believe implicitly, don't you, Gabrielle, that no change, inertia, is the worst enemy?
It's death. I mean, when I was 7 years old, I tripped over a dead man in the park, and the one thing that I observed was that nothing was moving. And therefore, if the body, when it's dead, nothing is moving, then when it's fully alive, everything is moving, including the breath. I mean, I work with hundreds and hundreds of people, and most Western people are breathing to about here. And we're talking about, like, spirit isn't some abstraction. It's a real direct experience of God in the body now, you know, of being breathed to one's toes, of living the light. You know, it's that I am as deep as I breathe, as I am breathed. So that the whole point, I suppose, would be to get everything out of the way of that level of breathing, which is full and total. and that which allows us to feel deeper states such as ecstasy or bliss or compassion. And the point is, how do we remove, what do we do with all this baggage that we're carrying around? What do I do with all that fear and all that anger and all that repressed stuff? What do I do with all those attitudes and dogmas and theories that are just holding me back and holding me down and turning me into somebody that I'm not? What do I do with them? And for me, I had to dance. I had to relieve myself of the whole of Western culture. I had to find that emptiness where I could begin again. And to see if there is such a thing as truth. I wanted it now. I wanted to experience it. I wanted it in this body, in this lifetime, not some other day, some other time. I wanted it now.
And our time is up. I am sorry, but thank you all very, very much. In our next New Age program, we'll be moving away from self-discovery and looking at our relationship with the living planet. About self-discovery and personal transformation. This program is about how we see the Earth, its mysteries, its being, and its connection with us. And later on I'll be talking about these ideas with three people for whom the Earth is very much alive. Far from being a new idea, reverence for a living planet was at the heart of many ancient cultures, when people were aware that the Earth had energies of its own.
It does seem that by getting more in touch with the flow of nature, you become more in touch with the flow of that which underlies nature.
If the Earth is alive, then it operates exactly in an analogous form to a human body or any other living creature.
It's very difficult to express what an energy line feels like. You can actually get a reaction from a rod or a pendulum quite easily. But once you start tuning into these energies, you find that you only get a reaction from a specific energy. And the center of the energy is there where the rods cross, at that point. And all the energy comes out from that center. And the line, in fact, comes straight through the center of the church, and is the full width of the church, and stops there. Somewhere about 3 years ago, Paul Broadhurst came down and had a chat with me about the possibility of doing this quest to trace the energies around the St. Michael line. And we had a long chat about it, and we thought perhaps, as it's a straight line, it will take us 6 or 7 weeks, or perhaps 3 or 4 months just to wander around the country quietly checking it. And to our absolute consternation, we found that the energy didn't follow the straight line. And then we started putting it down on a map and discovered that the energy was going round like a river, like a serpent. And we decided that we had stumbled on something which is quite important.
We tracked this particular current from St Michael's Mount in Cornwall all the way up for about 150 miles through Glastonbury, through many interesting places. And when we got to Avebury, we saw set in stone for the first time in the quest this serpentine, meandering earth energy current, which we'd tracked. But here people had immortalised it in vast stones and laid it out precisely as it was appearing to us.
What we're doing in the simplest possible terms is perhaps introducing people who have ignored these functions of the earth to the very simple need to get back to them, to get back to a set of values that means something.
So at certain points, these energies do create great vortexes which you can douse, which you can experience. If people are psychically aware of these things, then it can actually sort of help them to transcend to different levels of perception. And people report very similar psychic feedback from crop circles. So we could be dealing here with an energy system of the Earth which is beginning to reawaken in lots of different forms.
The circle is an image of containment, and as such naturally reminds us all of the female principle, which is the goddess. So it's very interesting, isn't it, that these crop circles, which just came into such prominence in the 1980s and now in the 90s, have occurred at a time when we are turning our attention to the female principle again. There is a long tradition of actually giving the Earth a persona, seeing the Earth as a living being and a being who actually organises herself deliberately. It's tended on the whole to be a female persona. Being in touch with the Earth can put us in touch with the spirituality which is in ourselves and also outside us. The whole sense of contact reported by mystics the world over is of feeling a divinity inside us which is also outside us. And people who are willing from the beginning to see the Earth as an expression of divinity are in a sense more likely to be able to make that contact than people who assume that the Earth is fallen.
I think it's essential that we relearn the whole attitude of reverence and sanctity as it was once applied to the Earth. We have been treating the Earth in a most contemptible fashion. It's beginning now to react to centuries of abuse.
The people in ancient times who understood the Earth as a goddess, as literally a living goddess, would not have exploited the Earth in the way that we feel entitled to do. You don't exploit a goddess.
These energy currents, which we spent the last 3 years tracking, appear to us to be the veins and arteries of some sort of nervous system of the planet. We've been taught since the Industrial Revolution that the Earth is virtually a lump of dead rock where life just happens to thrive by some sort of crazy accident. The ancient people, and now modern scientists with their Gaia hypothesis, seem to be at one accord in understanding that the Earth is actually alive.
The veins and arteries of a living planet and the Earth as a living thing. Rupert Sheldrake, does that fit in with your thinking about the planet?
Yes, it does. I think that the Earth is best thought of as a living organism. And not just the Earth, but I think that the whole of nature is best thought of as alive. So it's not that we have a living Earth in a dead universe, but we have a living cosmos of which the living Earth is part.
When you say alive, I mean a plant is alive. What do you mean by alive?
Alive means with its own organizing principle within itself, what usually was called the soul in old forms of thought, in the Middle Ages, for example. Animals were called animals because they had souls, the Latin word for which is anima. People believed plants had souls, that the planets and the Earth and the whole world had a soul, the soul of the world. And so they thought of nature as animate. In the 17th century there was a change, of course, through the mechanistic revolution when people thought of nature as inanimate. And nowadays most people seem to think both. On Mondays to Fridays most people think of nature as inanimate for making profit and exploiting natural resources. And at weekends most people revert to the older attitude and really try to form some kind of connection to nature, often trying to get back to nature in a car.
And it is that it is that interconnectedness that's absolutely important.
Yes, the animate idea of nature is of nature as interconnected, self-organizing, with its own internal purposes, its own internal directions, and its own life principle within it. You see, the alternative model, the 17th century onwards, had an alternative model which was nature as a machine. And the thing about a machine is it's made by somebody external to it and used by somebody external to it, but it doesn't have any animating principle within it.
You are a strong believer, I think, in the feminine principle of the earth. We heard talk of that, the masculine and the feminine in the earth, and the goddess, the earth goddess.
Well, traditionally, the earth has been thought of as Mother Earth, and this is just a cliché phrase even today in English. So it's the tradition in which we've seen it, like nature has traditionally been seen as feminine, Mother Nature.
But when you were training 25 years ago, I guess that was not the thinking.
No, it wasn't, and it still isn't within official science. Within official science, the mechanistic worldview is still the dominant model of the world. Most of my scientific colleagues, like I myself, learned to think in mechanistic terms when we were in the laboratory. But the interesting thing is that most of my colleagues, like myself, when they left the laboratory, reverted to an older and more fundamental way of seeing the Earth. I mean, some of my most ardently mechanistic friends who want to reduce all life to biochemistry and to chemicals and physics and so on, love going hiking in the Lake District at weekends and on holidays. And when they're there, they're very much like anyone else. They like Wordsworth's poetry, and they like the idea that they can have a kind of living, personal relationship with the natural world. Most of us are like that, and just exist as split people.
Caitlin, how have we lost touch with our Earth, do you think?
I think a lot of it is to do with what we were just talking about, that the idea we've lost the metaphor of deity as female. We have only deity as male. To most people, God is only God the Father.
You're blaming Christianity then?
No, I'm not blaming Christianity. I mean, I think this was a long, successive process. But I think that the image that we were seeing in the film of the circle is a very compelling image, because people meet together in circles. They gather together in circles. And we tend now to be approaching a masculine deity sort of head on. We go towards an altar. We don't meet in the round anymore. So there are lots of ways in which the loss of the goddess from our culture, because deity is neither male nor female. God and goddess are names, they're like the left and right hands of deity, if you wish. Ways in which we approach the sacred and the divine, and the metaphors that we give to them, such as we call the earth feminine, we call the earth mother. The loss of that metaphor has given us great difficulties in our society. It's given an opening to an exploitative frame of mind, if one can think of it that way, that the earth being no longer sacred, being no longer considered our mother, is just part of a dead lump of rocks and gases, which is how we have been led to believe of the earth, instead of it being an animate principle of which we are a part.
And you're seeing those links back to Mother Earth? You're seeing that?
I think so. I think that the whole of our sacred tradition is a seamless garment, and I think that to divide ourselves from the sacrality of creation, of seeing ourselves as all relations, and not just human beings, but also the minerals and the vegetables and the plants and the animals. So we're all part of the same creation, and one is no better than the other.
Satish, what does a living earth mean to you?
When I am out in the nature and I gaze at a tree, I feel as if tree is my brother. To me, tree has same respect for me and same kind of relationship with tree I feel as if I was feeling with another human being. Like I believe in sacredness of human life, sanctity of human life, I believe same in the sanctity of that tree. And that tree is very compassionate. It gives shade, it gives wood, it gives fruit, it gives everything human beings need. So it's a very given, like mother gives milk and birth, and brother gives help, and neighbors give help. Tree helps me. So my relationship with tree is very similar to my relationship with other human beings.
So there's no hierarchy in your thinking in this earth at all. There is no man set out separate from this. We are all actually worth the same thing on this earth.
I would say that everything has value in itself, all creation, and everything in its place has its importance. When we want to sit on a lawn, grass is most important. At that time, nothing else, mountains are not important, but the grass is important. When we want to watch a bird sitting on an oak tree, then oak tree is important. When I want to go and have vegetables, then vegetable garden becomes more important. In the same way, human relationship become important when it is appropriate, in right time, in right place. Everything in creation has a wonderful value. I don't believe that human beings are superior to nature, then come animal, then come plants and so on, and then come mineral. I think everything is a network. This whole creation is a network, a wonderful, beautiful, romantic almost network. And I want to see the wonder and the mystery of it as it is, without this theories that this is higher, this is lower, this is more important, this is less important. This is all our intellectual theorizing.
We've come away from that, Satish, because you're suggesting, I mean, there's a big movement, isn't there? There's a big environmental movement.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, I don't know, but are they thinking the same thoughts? Do you think they're thinking the same thoughts, Kathleen, as Satish?
I think the important thing is some people think that we've reached it's too late, that, as you say, it's just too late for us to sort of save the earth. But I think that wherever we happen to be right now, and the place where we are, that's where our work is. And whether that's in a high-rise block in the city or whether that's somewhere in the country, it makes no difference. We're still all part of the earth, and we should be caring for our environment exactly where we are. And if that means being more careful about the things we buy and the way that we dispose of things and the way that we use the things that we are given from creation, which have all come from the bounty of the gods, of the god and goddess, whichever name you like to use.
But environmental thinking is it is politically inspired, isn't it? It does sort of make for votes, and it gets...
environmental thinking, for example, lots of people think that we can manage the earth, management of the planet, and I think that is a very shallow approach. It's a technological fix. They think we are the masters. Still this idea of superiority is still there. We can organize the earth. We can do it. And I think that is where things are going wrong.
Rupert, do you agree with Satish on that?
I do, yes. I think that the relationship we have to the earth, if the earth is a living organism, implies that we need to form a deeper kind of relationship personally and collectively with the earth. And so I think that the process involves not just recognizing the earth as alive, a living system in which things are cycled as they are in living systems, rather than following a one-way course from mine through factory to waste dump, but rather that if the Earth's alive, that's the first stage, and most people in the environmental movement have taken on board that idea. But also that the Earth is sacred, and so I think resacralizing our relationship to the Earth personally and collectively is a very important stage.
Do we deny technology and where we've got to in this thinking? I mean, there are people in the green movement who would sort of get rid of all.
Well, I wouldn't myself. I think that we can't. I mean, it's impractical, but we can try and change and modify our reliance on technology and in some ways reduce it. But I think that the resacralization of the earth involves forming a new kind of relationship with the natural world. And I myself think that one of the most important steps in this is transforming tourism, which means going to particular places because of their quality, into pilgrimage, which means going to the same places because of their quality, but in this case open to their spirit and forming a connection with them.
But like as Stonehenge would be, or as Glastonbury would be, you mean?
Well, many people do go to Stonehenge and Glastonbury, or to Lincoln Cathedral, or wherever, as pilgrims. Some go as tourists. But the modern tourist industry takes hundreds of millions of people a year all over the world to the ancient sacred places of the world. Most of them are encouraged to go there to see them, to take photographs of them, but are not going in the spirit of pilgrims. I think actually tourism's a kind of secularized pilgrimage, and underneath the surface, tourists are would-be pilgrims.
But I have to say, I get sort of slightly worried when you see people on that hillside. Kathleen, perhaps you can answer this, because it was at Glastonbury that in this whole myth of Mother Earth and our interconnectedness, that somehow any kind of action will get lost along the line. and that we will actually sort of go backwards because we'll all be so busy discovering our own relationship with the earth that, you know, meanwhile, rainforests die.
Well, I think our responsibility must be where we are, as I said. You've got to start with your personal responsibility. And if one is put on earth for a reason. So one must find one's spiritual path, whatever that spiritual path is, and follow it. And if you're following a spiritual path properly, it will lead you to the path of duty, the path which is beneath your feet where you're standing. And you'll take the next step, and the next step, and the next step, and that will lead you to the place where you're supposed to be, if you're faithful to it.
I find
that is what all spirituality is about.
Yes.
And it's very incremental and it's very slow. And it's a very, very transforming experience, so that if you look back on yourself 5 years on along that path, you may not recognise the person that you look back upon. So we must not forget that the change is slow, and that the changes that we're seeing now and the changes we hope are coming about will come about probably in the time of our children, by the time they're adults, that by the time they look back on the time we're the same age, they will say to us, how could you have lived like that? And you will look back and say, how indeed? But how things have changed.
But people do feel, Satish, don't they, powerless? I mean, I know the New Age, the theories of self-empowerment.
Yeah.
But people feel it's a waste of time, as one individual consciousness.
You talked about technology. I think technology has been instrument in disempowering people. It makes people feel impotent. Technology can do it, I can't do it. And by becoming more ecological, more Gaia conscious, more environmentally conscious, we become empowered, and we say, if we tread lightly, and if we have a right relationship with the earth, and because we have to take something from the earth, we cannot live without taking. To build our house, we have to take tree. We have to dig mines to make bricks or stone, or for our food we have to use the earth. For our clothes we have to use the earth. So it is not wrong to take, but take and put it on the dump, waste. That is not right relationship. Take, but you must give back. So if you take one tree, plant 5 trees. If you are growing vegetables in your garden, put some compost back. Instead of throwing your kitchen waste into the dustbin, put it back on the compost so that it goes back into the earth.
How are you going to persuade, though, those powers that be that is the thinking that should prevail? How are you going to persuade them to do that?
I mean, it is when the consciousness is right, people will be forced to change their ways. When consciousness in the Eastern Europe was ready, all the powers that may be went overnight, and the Berlin Wall came down absolutely overnight. In the same way, when people have realized that all this materialism, all these aeroplanes, all these motorways, nothing is bringing happiness to us. Where is our human spirit? Then overnight you will see a tremendous change. I'm an optimist. I'm not worried that change will not come. The New Age message is we must start thinking in our own heart and mind, and start our own. It's better to light one candle than curse the darkness. If you start changing your own life, it will spread. And if you just criticize, the government is bad, industry is bad, business is bad, church is bad, you do nothing. That is disempowerment. The empowerment is you take one step, as Kathleen said, one step, second step, third step. One by one, you will see the world is changing in front of your eyes.
Rupert, what would you do to persuade the powers that be?
Well, I don't think of the powers that be as being different people from the rest of us. Most people I know who are powerful in business or government or the civil service are just like everybody else. They want to be powerful because they want to be rich, usually, or at least powerful. And the reason they want to be rich, if people want to be rich, is so they can have enough money to buy a lovely place in the country. Away from it all, they can go onto a kind of retreat into the country. And people who...
And so they're expedient.
Well, I think it's the same split that all of us have, the Monday to Friday split versus the weekend and holidays split. The powers that be, the people in power, know as well as any of us that at weekends on holiday there's something to be found in nature which we need, some kind of relationship we need.
But how do you change their policy making then?
Well, somehow by making it clear that that part of us which we usually think of as private, subjective and personal, our relationship to nature that many of us have, is not just something private, subjective and personal. It's telling us something true about the earth, true about nature, which needs to spill over into our everyday Monday to Friday life. And I think the environmental movement in general is happening because that perception that people have deeply and intuitively is now coming to have an impact on our ordinary economic and political life.
Caitlin, what would you do?
I agree with Rupert. I think that people in power are like people elsewhere, and all people have families. And I think I would just ask them, what about your children? We must do nothing to harm the children. That is the policy of all spiritual traditions, all moral codes. What about our children? What will we leave for them? How will they live? If they can answer that, then they have the next step under their feet.
Caitlin, Satish, Rupert, thank you. In our last programme, everyone involved in our New Age Forum will be returning to the studio to discuss the impact that New Age ideas could have on society. To the sixth and final part of the New Age. In the last 5 programmes, some of this group of 40 people have explored various aspects of New Age thinking with me. We've discussed ways in which people can be guided to greater self-discovery, how they can be healed in more than just physical terms, how they can grow spiritually, and how they can learn to feel part of the living planet. But as optimistic and visionary as many of these ideas are, it's only natural to wonder what impact they can actually have on mainstream society. Can they really help change the way we live and the way we look at the world? Or will they be hopelessly marginalised? Well, the whole of our group has gathered here at the end of this 2-day forum to help answer these questions. One of the basic New Age thoughts is that through personal transformation, we can change the world. Now, I'm still having difficulty with this because it is self-discovery. It's so easily and so close to being self-indulgence. How can I be also a kind of moral, good person at the same time? How can I ensure that?
Personal change and social change go hand in hand. It's like walking on 2 legs. If you're walking on 1 leg, you won't go very far. So if you make a personal change, at the same time, you bring about social change. So they are not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand together. If I am not happy, I cannot make anyone else happy. But if I am happy, then I am happy to make you happy, society happy. So personal transformation and social transformation, for me, are one and the same thing.
Yes, I'd like to come in on that because this whole thing about self-love isn't selfish. It's liking yourself. It's being happy in your own skin. And if you can't like yourself, if you can't love yourself, how can you love other people? It must start with you. And then it's putting that into action. It's living your own truth. It's being your truth. And, not just talking about things, but actually living it out. And it has to start right where you are, because that, in turn, interrelates to the vaster picture.
At a very practical level, when you start to work on yourself, you have to start looking at your shadow. And as you start working on your shadow, you become aware of your selfishness, your egoism, your greed, your violence. If you start in your own heart, you have a certain authenticity when you ask your children not to hurt and not to be selfish. And when you work in an office, or you work in a school, or you work in a factory, and you behave selflessly with authenticity, you begin to touch other people.
Yes. War begins at home. War begins within oneself. We experience wars out on the planet as the potential in the Gulf at the moment, but the Gulf really begins within oneself. If one can heal the potential for war within oneself, then oneself and another, the wider family and so on, then that peace spreads over the planet. All things begin. While we experience wars out there, it means we as the human race collectively are largely at war within ourselves.
I think following on from that too, another key point is this question of interconnectedness that we've talked about in these 2 days here. And when I make a change in myself, that change does not just affect me, that affects people around me, and in some small but nonetheless significant way, that affects the whole planet. And following on from that then, I see that my own health and welfare and development depends on the world around me. My own health depends on the health of the planet. Therefore, it's a very natural step for me to work with my own health and also to be concerned and actively involved in maintaining the health of the planet. So that's really where they tie together.
How do we link this with religious systems? I mean, is there a place? I know, Eileen, that you made your own route to personal discovery, but you have reconnected with the church. And why you felt the need to do that?
Well, I think reconnected with the church. I wouldn't put it quite like that, because but what happened for me was that I was not actually brought up in the church, but I started going as a teenager to church, and I didn't really comprehend really what was going on, but at some level I got something out of it which I felt that I needed. And then in the early 70s I became very caught up with the interest in the East and turned eastwards and have been involved in sampling different religious traditions and studying them for some time and practicing meditation. And for me, I began to feel drawn back to our tradition that we have here in the West, and a need to rediscover that, because in a sense I feel perhaps it resonates more with my own psyche.
But so you needed the framework. It was important to have that established framework.
Yes, I think so.
David?
I think one can make a connection here. The traditional Christian ethics is based on, in paternalistic terms or patriarchal terms, the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, i.e. The fact of having a common divine ancestry, if you like, a divine connection, means that we are all connected because we are all part of the same creation. And what we're doing, I think, here is we're restating this point by this philosophy or ethic of interconnectedness. And this interconnectedness implies that we as selves are related to each other, and we define ourselves by the very quality of our relationships. And if we are related to each other in an open way, if we're related to the earth so that we see the earth as sacred and we see each other as sacred, then our ethics, our way of behaving towards each other, is conditioned by this worldview.
But
and
then
it's a very
love thy
traditional
neighbour as thyself is a commandment, isn't it? It is in an established formal religion.
I think that's what we're saying here is precisely a restatement of this.
Gary Davis, you have been in the priesthood. You've been listening to what's been going on. I mean, how does this sort of fall with your thinking?
Well, I still am a priest, although I choose not to operate on the whole within the structures of the church, but I am still ordained. For 20 years, you're right, I was a full-time parish priest. And there is a connection with my story with what's being said, because I learned all the things that this group knows so well from within the Gospels and from within my own tradition. And in a sense, I moved out of my tradition because, for me, it became a point of decision between a structure which says essentially, here is a dogma, here is a creed, sign on the end of this, however nicely they say it, and pronounce yourself saved. Which I don't want to invalidate that tradition because it's given me so much and I still hold it very dear. But more and more what people are beginning to experience is that somehow or other the focus is no longer in a revealed historical perspective, but is being experienced from within their own person and their own psyche, and all of those eternal patterns of truth are beginning to be felt from within their experience of day-by-day living. So it feels to me like the biblical vision, which actually appears in the prophet Jeremiah and then again is spoken of in the New Testament about an age of spirit coming, is actually a good description of what we're experiencing today. It's the age of the spirit.
I think it's important to say, though, that this is not automatic, and that it's questionable whether we're actually going to arrive where we want to go. And
what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's tough. Somebody said it's tough. It requires very hard work, and it requires bravery and courage, and it requires the ability to turn to yourself and really see yourself so clearly And most of us are afraid to do that. And that's really the essential problem.
Yes. Letting go of fear about finding yourself. I just feel this very strongly because we're not what we think we are. You know, we're a whole lot of conditioning. We're conditioned from the moment we're born, conditioned by our parents, our friends, our schooling, our culture, where we're brought up. But we're not that. And it's having the courage to find who we really are.
But isn't it time to stand up and be counted, or at least to be accountable? I mean, Joanna Fries, you're working at the moment with the EEC towards 1992.
Yes, we have of course struggles, but as I've said, a lot of the old ideas have been taken in. We talk about what the earth has given us, food as a medicine, the herbs for healing, but we talk about old methods like acupuncture, and these were not recognized for a long time. And in the EEC, where I do a lot of double-blind trial tests to try and get for 1992 the acceptance, which luckily is going very well, we try positively to do something about it. It was quite encouraging to hear one Ministry of Health saying to me just a few days ago, perhaps by law a lot of complementary practitioners are not allowed what they're doing, but there is no procurator fiscal who will handle it now because the public wants it. The public has seen the benefits of it, and this is all. This is again. It shows that we are in a new area.
Allegra. I'd just like to say I think one of the great tragedies that's happened in the healing movement has been this polarity that's grown up between our traditional forms of medicine in this country and what's loosely called the complementary therapies. Surely what we really want to see is a synthesis of all these things coming together, and that's where the accountability comes in, and it's not a separate way of healing, it's all part of the holistic method that we would like to have.
I'd like to comment very hopefully on that, because I think working within a holistic centre myself, I'm seeing more and more the incorporation of holistic approaches into large sections of the NHS. It's early stages. And I think also the complementary field is coming to maturity, because I don't think it is an alternative. I think it is a sense of bringing the whole person, as we've all been discussing, into medicine. And somehow medicine has lost track of that. There is a creative future for it.
I remember listening to you last night, in fact, Jill, and the excitement that you conveyed about, the sort of work that Joanna Fries is doing in the EEC. I just wondered if you could share that with us.
Yes, well, I was particularly interested just in a very simple aspect of cause and effect, of our new understanding of what we call our complementary or alternative therapy, just simply with diet. I mean, Jan was working with, if he doesn't mind me saying so, somebody who's in prison in Glasgow for murdering several times. And just through diet, he's been able to lose the drive that he has to go out and commit those sorts of crimes. And then we can look at hyperactive children. I think it's tremendously exciting. We can see the relationship just simply between food and their behaviour. Or in my own practice, I see many children who have learning difficulties, where they'll come along for the type of cranial work that I do, or they may be hyperactive. So a combination of diet, the way Jan does it, and the sort of work I do.
So the boundaries are going, the boundaries have gone. It isn't either or anymore. It's
I think the intention is that the boundaries go. I think there are still polarities, there are still antagonisms, and I think programs like this and discussions like this are there to break those walls down.
What about the world of business? Because I know we have some people involved in business here, and how New Age thinking can make a difference, a permanent difference, in the workplace.
Well, the world of business is actually working away at this, beavering away at rather effectively, although it doesn't know it. It uses its own jargon, and the New Age uses its jargon, and I think the world of business would be pretty spooked by some of the stuff that it would have heard here. But nevertheless, they are talking about empowering the employee. They are talking about the need for creativity. They're talking about self-leadership, of leadership from alongside rather than leadership from the top, a nest of hierarchies. They are talking about business ethics. This, of course, started probably from the green movement and the necessity for the world of business to interact with that and to understand it. But there's an awful lot going on. The heroes of the 90s are not the same as the heroes of the 80s in the business sense, who were Robert Maxwell, Rupert Murdoch, the sort of rough, tough management by laceration brigade. They are people. They are people like John Harvey Jones.
You have to explain this.
Ex-chairman of ICI, an absolute ace manager, had an extremely successful television series. I interviewed him in 1983 and was talking about social change, and he said to me, "We must love our employees more." Now that's an amazing statement from the chairman of ICI. Another heroine is Anita Roddick.
The Body Shop.
The Body Shop. She was Businesswoman of the Year in 1987, Company of the Year in 1988, the darling of the city, and yet this is a truly, truly holistic business. She is concerned for her consumers. She is concerned for her franchisees, for her staff. She's concerned for the third world. She gets a lot of her supplies from the third world. She's concerned for the planet. And she does extremely well, thank you. And that is an example of what actually can happen. Now, I started with a colleague called Edward Posey 8 years ago, an organization called the Business Network, which was at that stage a sort of refuge for battered business people who believed this kind of thing and yet could not actually voice it in their workplace. 8 years later, we are now actually going public because it's becoming mainstream. We can talk about these things as long as we use the business jargon to do so.
Mm-hmm. Gary, you're involved in the same kind of work in working with businesses.
Yes, I am, and I agree wholeheartedly with Francis. It seems to me if we had to choose one arena for the next decade that's going to be almost more influential than any other for social and economic transformation, it's the world of business. And therefore it feels very important that people who are in whatever way becoming more conscious and awakened themselves start to listen to the business community, and I would say listen before they start talking to the business community, because if they listen they will start to discover that already, because of the collective unconscious mind that we all share in, that within the business world, popping up from all over the place, are the kind of issues and concerns and values that we're exploring in one form, and the business world is beginning to explore in another form. Mm. But if we listen to them, we will learn their concerns, learn their constraints and priorities, and therefore be much more useful to them. I also think one of the reasons why people like Francis and myself, and thank God there are many others, are important because we stand with a foot in both worlds. We are conventional business people, and we are also people who are aware of these issues. And if you're going to talk to the business world seriously, you have to prove your credibility, first of all. Mm. You've got to show that you're a serious business person who understands business as it is currently run.
But the reality is that executives are made redundant earlier and earlier and have to sort of rethink their lives, nurse their wounds, while their industry goes on to thrive.
Yes.
They're difficult messages.
There are very, very changing patterns emerging. I mean, there's another man, rather like the characters that Francis mentioned. There's a man called Charles Handy, who, along with lots of others, is speculating about the changing patterns that are going to affect all of us, but especially the business community. And if he and others like him are at all right in their predictions, what we're going to see are completely different patterns of work emerging, not only for the individual but for the company, so that the individual may work in the future by the turn of the decade maybe only half the present number of years that you work in your lifetime, and the company will, if that starts to be a reality, will start to relate through those executives and through those members of staff to the community in a new way. You're going to have a wonderful opportunity for all the people here and many others around the world who are working in community issues to relate to the business world in a quite unprecedented manner. But it's only just beginning, and it needs very sensitive handling.
I think one of the messages is actually that the penny is beginning to drop that it can be profitable to love thy neighbour, which means that there are going to be a lot of happy neighbours about it.
Perhaps we can move on to education, because obviously it's through education that attitudes change and people can sort of follow the New Age philosophy, if you like. Now, what's the way to change through education? How do we achieve change?
One point I would like to make about education, and there are other points we have talked in our education discussions, but I started a school in my village in North Devon, Heartland, because I feel that our education, the mainstream state and public schooling, is so secular and so deprived of values, and the schools are so big that human relationship hardly exists, and young people from very early age become alienated. The rising crime rate, in my view, is related with this alienation of young people, because they are sent to these schools of 1,000, 2,000, 1,500 children. They don't know each other, they don't know their teachers, teachers don't know their children's parents, so all the relationship is totally broken down. However, I think what can be done in a small rural village can also be done in an inner city area in the neighborhood school model. Why not every neighborhood, Kentish Town in London, Camden Town, Hampstead, every area should have a neighborhood school of 200, 300 children where parents and teachers and children are in true partnership and they know each other and they can learn in human way and with spiritual values and human values and all the values we are talking about.
Let's just take up the point of how we learn and what your thinking is on that. As compared with how we learn now in a very formal way. Rupert?
I think that one of the things that the New Age movement has done most successfully is help pioneer a new way of educating, and the model for this is the workshop. That doesn't mean a room full of lathes and hammers and so on, although it could do. It means something that's different from a lecture, different from a seminar, the things that we're familiar with from conventional education. Workshops take place in groups, and they involve not only the imparting of information, but an attention to the dynamics of the group, the emotional reactions of people in the group, how they're getting on with each other. And they're things that are much more holistic. They bring in many more aspects than merely intellectual learning. These are going on all over Britain, all over the world.
For adults, for children?
These are for adults. And I think it's in the area of adult education that the New Age movement's been most successful and has had the greatest impact. This system has developed spontaneously without government grants, without being organized by ministries or anything like that. It's just happened, a kind of grassroots movement. There are hundreds and hundreds of these workshops going on all around Britain.
You talked about adults, but Brian Masters, you're involved in the Steiner Foundation with children.
Yes, I'd like to put in a plea for childhood there, yes. I think it's important that the new spirituality, which I think everyone here experiences in their own way, feeds down into education. I think otherwise, if we look at the worst scenario, we would have a situation where a few people would have gained some sort of spiritual insight into life and have made many others the better for it may be. But there's a danger that one would end up not with a new age, but with a new toy that's worn out and discarded. And we must think of our children as the next generation. We must see in them the seeds of the future, and according to what attitudes we, it's a very difficult word now, instill, begin to, yes, plant as a seed in childhood, so they will develop in freedom, of course, in adulthood. And I think this is terribly important, that we find a very professional way of developing our insight into the nature of childhood, developing a curriculum, developing all that Satish has referred to, the connection with the community, developing a real methodology, real creativity, and that this should be a free education open to all parental choice.
What about education? When we're talking about a new education, is to go back to the roots of the very word to educate, which comes from the Latin educare, which means to draw out. And the whole principle is that we have a source of wisdom within us, the spirit within us, which, when we fully tap into it, is all-knowing. And to allow that to have a creative expression is a radically different form of education than what we normally experience in the schools, which often is a case of packing in information and facts purely for the left brain, for the intellectual stimulus.
So what I'm getting from you all this, that we're not exactly fighting what is. We've just got to use what is and take it further. Is that right? Because it isn't a fight against the establishment.
We don't need any more new institutions. We need substance within the ones we have. Substance that counts, you know, that changes and that allows for the genius that each of us is to pour forth and to find our individual destiny here. That's what children need. They need to be honored.
Thank you all for your thoughts, and thank you too for your time. There are very challenging issues raised in this series, and I wonder what you'll do with them at home. Goodbye.